reminder, this presentation is copyrighted. The purpose of the webinar today is to help you gain an understanding of how to optimize your supply chain to reduce impacts across the triple bottom line and realize tangible business value. At the end of this presentation, you will be able to first, understand the resources that your business is reliant on, which can hinder operations and growth. 2, identify long-term planning tools that you must consider to help you address risk and create opportunities throughout your supply chain. 3, explain how to use supply chain risks as opportunities for innovation and value creation to stay a forward-thinking company. And finally, examine how the principles of sustainability can be applied to supply chain analysis and strategic planning to ensure continued success. Tad Radzinski is our presenter today, and he is president and co-founder of Sustainable Solutions Corporation. Tad works with many organizations to refine and execute their corporate sustainability strategies. He has worked with dozens of companies to benchmark product and operations performance and recommend improvements. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and the link will be sent to everyone who registered. Tad will be happy to answer your questions towards the end of the webinar, so please send all your questions through the questions pane in the side control panel at any time. And now, here's Tad.
Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate the introduction, and I want to thank everybody for joining today. We have a really good audience and quite a diverse group of people that are online today. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick background about Sustainable Solutions. We've been practicing corporate sustainability now since 2001 and have worked with many different manufacturers and other organizations to integrate sustainability into their business strategies. And really, that is the direction we continue to go as we, focus on helping our various clients. And one activity that is been, very large for us right now is the area of supply chain auditing and understanding supply chains and the different chemicals that are being used in products and whatnot. And that's going to be quite a bit of the discussion today. And I definitely see this as something that's going to be an area of great focus probably for the next coming 5 to 10 years. And for all of you that are on this webinar today, you'll definitely want to start to be thinking about how you can evaluate your supply chain, how you can optimize that supply chain, how you can understand the risks within your company. And that is definitely a very big aspect of what's coming from not only regulations but other standards and things like that. We also do sustainable buildings and operations work, everything from LEED certification through energy audits, and then training and education is a major aspect of what we do. We do these webinars on a regular basis to give people lots of information and knowledge to help them really advance their sustainability programs. So again, thank you all for joining, and I look forward to spending the next 45 minutes with you before we take questions to run through the slides we have today. So one thing that we have to think about when we're thinking about sustainability of any organization is, what are our risks? And there's definitely many risks in today's society. It really depends a lot about what your organization does. But for example, if you are a manufacturer of something, there's going to be definitely materials or resources or different suppliers that you really rely on for the success of your company, for the success of getting your products out the door. And being able to understand what the risks are to you as an organization is a really important aspect of your sustainability program. When you're doing a materiality assessment, for example, you really want to identify what are the risks that are not only your short-term concerns, but what could be something that could really affect the long-term sustainability of your organization. So we are going to be delving into that a little bit today and talking about how to use those to optimize your sustainability program and also to plan for the future to ensure that you can operate for the long term. So one thing that we definitely know is there's a lot of people on the planet, and what's really interesting is there's a lot of people that are entering the global middle class right now. Right now, I think there's about 1.8, 1.9 billion people that live like the people you see in this photograph on the slide right now. We're expecting that to go to about 4.8 billion people by 2030, which is only 15 years away. And we all really have to ask ourselves, how are we going to supply another 4 billion people with all these products and materials that we see in this picture in a sustainable manner? And that's going to take a lot of really creative thinking by some really smart people. It's really going to take activities of some of our largest manufacturers and other organizations out there that have a lot of money and a lot of power in the world to really try to change the system and really try to drive sustainability not only within their organizations but deeply down into their supply chains, so we can actually create a sustainable future for many people on this planet. I can pretty much tell you that if we have another 3 billion people in the world that want all of these products and materials that you see here, I think we're going to definitely be seeing resource limitations. I also think we're going to be having issues just around natural resources and things like that to be able to provide these kind of goods and services to a much larger group of people in the world. And as we're running right now, I don't really foresee this as a very sustainable path without some major changes. So we do know for a fact that our current system is designed as taking products and raw materials out of the earth, making various materials and manufactured goods, product manufacturing, and then using those products and materials and then basically throwing them away. Cradle to grave, take, make, waste system. And I talk about this all the time, not only on my webinars, but in the education and teaching we do for a lot of our clients and the education we do at Villanova in the Sustainable Engineering program. And we do know that every step in this process is going to create impacts. You're going to basically be putting in energy and resources and labor into each step, and you're going to be getting emissions and waste and many other environmental impacts coming out the bottom. And then every one of these green arrows actually represents a transportation step. So if we're thinking about the way we are going right now, we are definitely a cradle-to-grave society, and we really need to move more to a cradle-to-cradle or circular economy type of society in the future. And we do also know that in this whole mix here is not only our raw materials, but we have suppliers that are going to be providing these materials to us. Most manufacturers aren't making everything within their facilities. The days of big integrated plants, like back in the day when the Ford Motor Company had everything under one roof, they could basically build a whole car, every single part in one plant. Those days are pretty much over. And just about every manufacturer out there relies on some supply chain to provide goods or services or raw materials or parts to them. And every one of us on this call also is, somewhere in that supply chain as well. Every time we go shopping and buy something, we're buying products from some manufacturer that has a supply chain behind them. Even if we're, working in our offices and just buying office paper, there's definitely, whether you're going to Staples or Office Depot or whatever, they have a supply chain that's actually creating those products for you to use. And then we're integrated very heavily into this whole flow of materials by, just by the way we handle the materials after we use them and different things like that. And, so supply chain, understanding your supply chain is going to be a major theme of today's discussion. And also understanding your risks is going to be very important as well. We also know that, from a perspective of the way we operate our systems and, our different processes and buildings and plants, we do have many global challenges right now. Probably one of the biggest is definitely the things we're seeing around climate change and, different aspects of altering the carbon cycle. And as this image illustrates here, this large coal facility, I can tell you that there's many impacts of generating electricity from coal. In fact, I just read yesterday that there's several power plants being shut down in Beijing that burn coal right now because of the impacts on air quality to the people living in that city, and they're actually switching to natural gas. So what that represents to me is we've got some serious pollution issues. We've got some serious issues that could threaten our, the way we live and, the way we basically get our goods and services these days. And these are important things to consider. And when you see the Chinese government shutting down one of their, coal is definitely their most used fuel for generating electricity, starting to realize that they've got serious issues and switching fuels, that's a sign that, they're understanding that this is a serious matter as well. The other thing we have to think about when we think about global challenges is, if you are a manufacturer and you have suppliers that are around the world, you're going to have situations where you could have natural disasters that could really affect your supply chain. I remember when the tsunami and the earthquake hit Japan a few years ago, not only did that cause some serious damage and some issues with their nuclear plant and whatnot, but it also put many of the manufacturing facilities out of business for a while. And we had a number of clients that were receiving chemicals and raw materials from Japan that suddenly lost one of their primary suppliers of a main ingredient, and that really not only affected the price of the raw materials and chemicals they needed, but it really also created significant shortages of that raw material. So when you're thinking about risk, you have to assess all these different things. What are you relying on as a company? What are the different, where are the locations you're sourcing from? We just saw the big earthquake in Nepal, and I don't know what that's going to do to the supply chain. But again, different things like that are going to happen. And when you're thinking sustainability and you're planning, you really have to factor in multiple items when you're considering your supply chain, what's really critical to you, your operations, what's really critical to the long-term sustainability of your organization. And when we think about risk, one thing I always ask everyone we work with is, let's sit down and really think about what are the 2 or 3 or whatever number it is, resources or services or raw materials that are critical to you to produce your products or create the services that you provide. So it could be fossil fuels, it could be oil, it could be metals, it could be minerals, it could be a specific chemical. So again, considering what's going on around the world, considering what is the long-term viability of these resources. Many of our customers also use rare earth elements, which are elements that are definitely in limited supply, like tantalum and niobium that you find in cell phones. And we're using these materials really rapidly, and we don't have a very good system of recovering them at the end of life of our products. So again, those are very important. And what would happen if suddenly those chemicals or minerals were no longer available, or they were available but they cost 10 times as much? What would that mean to your operations and to your sustainability of your organization? It really requires thinking about the present and the future. And the questions I list here are very important questions you should be asking yourself and asking your management team or your sustainability team in your organization, because my hope is that sustainability is a major piece of your business strategy. And if you're not aware of these things, you could be really caught off guard if there would be a situation where you ran into some kind of resource limitation or some kind of natural disaster that have limited your ability to get supplies from a certain area of the world, or different things like that. So again, very important questions to ask as you're developing your whole sustainability program and really integrating into that business strategy. So let's just talk about a few things, a few of the market drivers for supply chain sustainability. There's quite a few of them right now, and one thing that we're really seeing a lot of activity with is in the area of understanding chemicals within products. And it all started back a few years ago when in Europe they rolled out some regulations called REACH and ROS. And since there's a lot of suppliers in the United States, North America, and other parts of the world that are supplying products and goods and services to Europe, they suddenly had to comply with some of these regulations. And these regulations, I can tell you, were not easy to comply with, especially if you look at ROS. Eliminating lead, cadmium, mercury, other chemicals out of electronic products really created a huge challenge for many manufacturers, especially since so many manufacturers that produce electronic products are using lead solder in their circuit boards and whatnot. Suddenly that required a major change to figure out different solders that were lead-free. We're finding that some of these lead-free alternatives do not have the same durability, which means that the products don't last as long. So a lot of different things you have to consider when you're really understanding these different regulations that are out there. Another big thing driving these different supply chain requirements is going to be green building standards, like LEED version 4 right now with the health product declaration and material disclosure requirements, and then living building challenge that has a red list of chemicals. So why do we really care about that? Well, you're thinking, I don't really provide products to buildings, but the thing is, if you have requirements to understand chemicals in products, that requires you to know who's in your supply chain, where you're getting your raw materials and your chemicals and parts from, and going back to them and asking them questions about what are they providing to you, what's in the product, are there certain chemicals you're not aware of, are they compliant with ROS, are they compliant with REACH? And let's not forget also we have organizations like Walmart that are definitely have through their sustainability programs are driving sustainability down through their supply chains. Google is doing the same thing right now, not so much in their supply chain, but really about forcing building product manufacturers to disclose information about the chemicals in their products before Google will actually allow them to be installed in their new buildings or renovations of buildings. So all these different things are really starting to force every one of us to start really understanding, all right, I guess we better know who our suppliers are. I guess we better get a good understanding of what's going on in regard to what chemicals are in our products. And that is not an easy task, I'm going to tell you that, especially if you've got a really diverse supply chain. I mean, we work with some companies that have over 1,000 suppliers in all parts of the world, providing all kinds of different parts, materials, chemicals, you name it. And for them to try to understand this is a very, very big undertaking. We also know that there are sustainable purchasing requirements that are being developed. Right now we're seeing the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council really driving different standards in regard to what is sustainable purchasing, what are some of the attributes of key product categories when it comes to sustainability. We're seeing the Sustainability Consortium and that group actually developing some really good information around product categories and where these product categories are coming out when it comes to sustainable attributes and different performance and things like that. And I can tell you that through executive order and other requirements, federal government, especially Department of Defense, GSA, just about every federal agency right now is required to purchase sustainable products. And part of that requirement means there's a need to understand what are the chemicals in your products, what are the life cycle impacts, what are some of the key attributes that are important to the federal government, and you cannot assess that on your own, especially if you're sourcing a lot from different suppliers, a lot of materials or a lot of products. You're going to have to go back to those suppliers to get information and to really be able to respond to or to provide the information that's required for these up-and-coming and existing standards and requirements around sustainable purchasing. We do know that Walmart rolled out their program in 2010. They sent a questionnaire out to 100,000 suppliers to make them all think about sustainability. Now they've evolved to the point working with the Sustainability Consortium where they're actually recognizing sustainability leaders for various product categories that are actually creating products that have lower impacts than the baseline in that different product group. So keep in mind here that Walmart has a lot of clout. They're making a big change, but they're not the only game in town. But they are a recognized leader in this area, and I think we're going to see a lot more other organizations driving sustainability down their supply chains. And I can imagine that most of you that are attending the webinar today are probably, some of you are probably definitely providing products that are sold to Walmart, and you've probably experienced this where you've had to report to the Carbon Disclosure Project, or you've had to fill out questionnaires, or you've had to benchmark your products against the different category standards that they've developed. So again, very important. And then we also know there's other companies out there like Kaiser Permanente that's driving sustainability into their supply chain by sending out questionnaires, and they're actually requiring reporting of different chemicals or raw materials in the products so they can understand if they want to continue to purchase those. So again, it's not just Walmart with their huge reach into the consumer products world, but we're seeing major healthcare organizations driving this as well, and there's a lot of other folks out there that are starting to do this. We have a lot of companies we work with that have created questionnaires for their suppliers. Number one, just to get an assessment of where their suppliers are in the world of thinking about sustainability, but even taking it to the next level of really starting to ask the questions of what are the chemicals, what are the materials that you're putting in your products, and we need you to provide that information so we can basically respond to these questionnaires. It's not an easy thing to do if you don't really know what your supply chain is doing to be able to report back to, a Kaiser Permanente or a Walmart. So you will be required, if you aren't already, to really delve into that supply chain. And I can tell you this whole thing is in the very beginning. I mean, there's definitely some leaders out there that have done a great job of this, but there's a lot of companies that really have a lot of work to do in this area. So the next thing we want to talk about is identifying opportunities, and supply chain risk is something that we really have to keep in mind. It's not only the risk of the raw materials and the products and suppliers that we use, but we see different things like this. This is the most recent thing I've seen where lumber liquidators, there was that 60 Minutes episode on that basically exposed the fact that lumber liquidators suppliers in China were sending over engineered wood products that were exceeding the formaldehyde limits significantly based on different standards. And I don't know who was telling who what, but it sounded like the lumber liquidators people weren't totally aware that these suppliers were using resins and glues in these products that were very high formaldehyde content, which were now having significant impacts when it came to indoor environmental quality, people's health, and things like that. So now we've got a serious situation here that's going to involve most likely significant lawsuits, maybe criminal charges, and probably could be the demise of this company. It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. We've also seen things in the automotive world where airbag problems, there's malfunctions or defects within products that were supplied as one little part in a car with thousands and thousands of parts has suddenly created a major issue for Honda. And we've probably in our recent memory the fire and the collapse of the building in Bangladesh where many workers were killed. That was a clear example of different manufacturers or different name brand companies not being totally aware of, or maybe they were aware of what was happening in the factories where their garments were being made, and a lot of people died, and there's been a lot of questions thrown out there of how good is our auditing, how good is our analysis of what goes on in these supply chains. So one thing to really think about when you're evaluating your supply chain risk, these are extreme examples here, but you definitely don't want to be caught on the end and not be aware of these things that can happen. So a couple key things I strongly recommend to anybody that has a vast supply chain or is involved in a supply chain. You definitely want to understand where your suppliers are, what is the diversity of them. Do you have multiple suppliers of one type of material that if something would happen like what happened in Japan where you suddenly wipe out a whole manufacturing plant, do you have another supplier you can get those materials from? Considering the geographic location, is it a high-risk area? Is it an area where there is high likelihood that there could be some natural disaster? Another thing that's really important about understanding supply chain risk is having very tight specifications. When you are sourcing from different countries, raw materials, chemicals, or even parts, you want to have tight specifications that include information on reporting, that are including information on material disclosure, and then you definitely need to have an auditing program where you have people that are actually getting on the ground, going out and visiting these facilities, because I can tell you, having done a ton of work within China and other low-cost countries, they're going to tell you whatever they think you want to hear. So it's really important that you're validating that what they're saying is accurate and correct. And then it's really important to have knowledge of your suppliers' suppliers. So, for example, let's say you're sourcing a metal part from somebody. That's great. They have the raw materials coming into their plant from somewhere, whether it's brass material like a bar stock, or steel, or aluminum. Where are they getting it? These suppliers of yours, you got to keep going down the supply chain and forcing your way down, especially if you want to understand from a material disclosure perspective what's in these products. So again, knowledge of your suppliers is going to be really important. And again, most people only go one level. We buy from company XYZ in Japan, or XYZ in China, or XYZ in Germany, and that's it. But they have suppliers too, and then it's good to get a feeling for where those materials are coming from. Another important thing when you're looking for your opportunities is really conducting a solid materiality assessment, considering the triple bottom line, considering how this whole sustainability aspect fits into your business strategy, and asking these hard questions here. What's really essential to your long-term business strategy? What's essential to what resources are critical? Who are the critical stakeholders? And being able to address these things is going to be really important as you find these opportunities. So, we have done many webinars now on materiality. We just did our seminar recently on, basically corporate responsibility revolution, integrating sustainability into your business strategy, and materiality was a huge piece of this. And this is something that's fairly new. You're starting to see companies with mature sustainability programs taking another hard look at what's important to them as an organization, but what's also important to their critical stakeholders. And I can guarantee that your suppliers are going to be a major stakeholder within the materiality aspects of your company. Another important thing is, understanding your supply chain, and it's important to do this not only for new, as you're going through the new product development process, but existing products and services. Huge part of this is going to be definitely data collection and analysis. And like I said, if you are an organization that has 100, 500, 1,000 suppliers that you rely on, and you're going to start having to report information, or you're going to start getting questionnaires from somebody, or you need to know to meet some government requirement, what's in your product, or what's the recycled content, or what are the regional material aspects of your product. The only way you're going to do that is to start asking and collecting data. And I am very sure that most organizations are not doing this and are even just beginning or starting. And here's an example of maybe how you would do that. You're requesting specific information about a material inventory, and this would be a sample from a questionnaire that we would use, asking about, do these materials you supply contain any of the following, and having the folks go through this and check off yes or no, and then holding them accountable for that, and being able to really evaluate that. Life cycle assessment is another great tool for understanding your supply chain. If you do life cycle assessment of a product or an operation, you're definitely going to get a major understanding of where your raw materials are coming from, where your chemicals are coming from, where your parts are coming from, who the suppliers are. Whenever we do a life cycle assessment, we are reaching out directly to the people in the supply chain to get that information, and that is a great start to doing your analysis and data collection. If you have done some life cycle assessments, go back to what you've already done and start to look at who those key suppliers were, what were some of the chemicals they were reporting or other raw materials, what are the transportation impacts. That's another important thing you'll learn from life cycle assessment. How are these raw materials and chemicals and parts getting shipped to us? Is it by train? Is it by bus, truck, ship? All kinds of different things, very important aspects and information that you'll learn through LCA. And with life cycle assessment, when we do think about life cycle, we are really understanding the entire product from, unfortunately cradle to grave on many of the products we make, but ultimately cradle to cradle, the circular economy, and having the ability to capture that information is really good. We also know that during life cycle assessment, it gives you the ability to really understand where your key risks are. When it comes to a certain raw material, maybe it's a risk you'll identify that you have certain raw materials or chemicals in your product that have a significant impact on, say, carbon footprint or global climate change or whatever, and those are going to be really important things that you want to be able to capture, and the life cycle assessment process will help you to do that for sure. So we've talked about, definitely some of the risk areas. We've talked about some drivers of why we even need to care about what's going on with our supply chain. Now we want to look at things you can put in your toolbox to make life better and to help you start collecting information and gathering data, because, like I said, understanding that supply chain is going to be really critical for you to move forward, not only as part of your sustainability program, but to meet customer requirements, to meet government regulations, and various other things. So a couple of the key things that we look to integrate within our customers' supply chain sustainability programs include, number one, identifying and evaluating all your suppliers. You'd be surprised, there's going to be definitely at least someone in your company that knows who your suppliers are. Maybe it's one person, maybe it's a whole host of people within purchasing, but I can pretty much be sure that most people in engineering or operations or logistics don't have a very good idea of who those suppliers are. So getting to the right people within your company, connecting with the right purchasers that are connected to these suppliers, and being able to work with them to gather information is going to be really important. Another key tool that we strongly recommend for anybody that's developing a sustainable supply chain program is going to be to integrate your sustainable product attributes into the new product development process and into your supplier specifications. We have done a lot of analysis of products over the years where maybe the manufacturer is interested in understanding how much recycled content is in their product. So what we typically will do is say, okay, we're going to reach out to all your suppliers who are supplying parts that are included in the bill of material or the recipe or whatever to understand what those recycled content aspects are. And most of these manufacturers do not have it written into the specifications that they have to have a minimum amount of recycled content. So by building that right into the specification, then you include not only the requirement for the percentage of recycled content or the percentage of bio-based or whatever or biodegradable or whatever you're selecting, but you also integrate into those specifications a requirement of your supplier to report that to you either quarterly or annually or whatever your time period is, so you can really get that data. And integrating that into the new product development process is really important. I'm actually going to talk about that in a minute. Another thing we mentioned is the reporting of chemicals and materials. I showed you an example of one question that we could ask. Typically our questionnaires are much larger. We try to be very comprehensive in the questionnaires that are submitted to collect this information, and we usually piggyback that on other requests. Sometimes manufacturing companies are going to be sending out questionnaires, maybe around quality, and what we can typically do is maybe piggyback some of those questions in that quality questionnaire as well, just depending on what type of products or services that are being produced. Another key aspect in any kind of sustainable supply chain activities is definitely going to be supplier training. Most big manufacturers that have a large supply chain are going to have at least annual supplier meetings where they bring all their suppliers together, and during those meetings that's an excellent time to start educating your suppliers on why you care about this information, why it's important that they provide it to you, why you're building it into your specifications, why if they want to do business with you they're going to give you this. And that's since you're a buyer, you spending money on these different parts or chemicals or supplies or whatever you're getting, you have the ability to have some leverage on these organizations to really get them to give you what you need in order to meet the requirements that are going to continue to change and continue to evolve as we see in more and more regulations and more sustainability questionnaires coming out into the market. When evaluating your supply chain, a very important thing to do is, especially in low-cost countries, you definitely need to do some type of a sustainable supplier audit. Like I said, we've done a lot of work in China and other countries, and we know that the environmental health and safety aspects of these facilities are not the same as here. There's a lot of people that work in those locations. You don't have the engineering controls and the regulations that you have in the United States or other developed countries, you are going to have people that are going to be exposed to certain things. You're going to have people in different manufacturing plants where there could be unsafe activities. So really understanding who you're purchasing from is really important, and getting those vendors qualified. We also strongly recommend that we do want our companies we work with to have good diversity in their supply chain, but you also want to minimize the number of suppliers that you're dealing with, because the more you have, the more redundancy. It does have some positive benefits, but it could also be negative, and it takes a lot of time to manage those folks, keep track of things, keep things organized, etc. Definitely establishing a supplier audit inspection requirements is going to be really important. That could be a simple checklist that maybe you do as part of, safety or EHS audits while you're there, looking at your suppliers, and also conducting supplier performance assessments. And what I mean by that is establishing some kind of minimum standards that you're expecting your suppliers to abide by, when it comes to not only their operations, but the different processes, the different raw materials they're using, different chemicals that they're supplying to you, being aware of all of that. And I can't emphasize enough that there are different third-party certifications and audits that can be done for you. Like I said, just because a supplier is telling you something doesn't mean it's really true. And we have found through third-party audits and certification that it really helps you get to the root of, what is really going on with your suppliers. Are they really telling you the truth? Are they providing clear and consistent information? So by getting a third party involved, that's very beneficial. Definitely they're going to help you, number one, do the audit, but they're also going to be able to evaluate your requirements, especially when it comes to meeting various aspects of different regulations and other things like that. So again, important to think about that and start to look for multi-attribute certifications that are coming out. Multi-attribute is definitely a wave that's getting a lot of traction right now. And to me, if you're really trying to understand the sustainability of your suppliers or your products or different things like that, a multi-attribute certification of not only the product attributes but of the manufacturing attributes and even the packaging attributes is going to be really important. I mentioned earlier about developing solid supplier specifications, building in chemical information requirements right into the specs, making it part of the contract requirements that, on a periodic basis, these suppliers are going to provide you the information, and then building that sustainable material or attribute requirements right in there is going to be really important. And when we think about new product development, sustainable product innovation, we definitely characterize by using life cycle thinking and integration of sustainability throughout the entire new product development process. Suppliers are going to be a major piece of that if you are a manufacturer of something. And having the ability to not only collect information from them and build it in automatically in your new products can be really important. Also understanding that you're integrating these various aspects throughout the stage gate process. Most manufacturers that we work with have a stage gate process. That's how they do their new product development process, and they're integrating in their different requirements at every stage and gate to start to evaluate supply chain sustainability, to start to evaluate their own operations, evaluating logistics and understanding transportation. And those do flow all the way through. And one thing we found is, being able to create, products that are meeting different standards and requirements. You have to start in the new product development process. Here on this screen, you now see an example of typical product requirements. If you're a manufacturer, you have to meet some kind of acceptable level of functionality or performance. There's going to be quality standards, cost requirements. You might have other requirements around aesthetics or meeting regulations or things like that. That's pretty standard. But in the world of sustainability now, you might be getting the need to build into your new product development process at least understanding material attributes like recycled content or biodegradability or bio-based materials. Or you might be required to decrease the life cycle carbon footprint of your products. Or maybe you need to know what chemicals are in those raw materials you're using because you are selling products in Europe and you have to comply with ROS or REACH. Or maybe you are a supplier that's making building products, and Google will not put your products in their buildings if you have certain chemicals within them. So again, all these different things have to be considered, and the best place to do that is right in the product development process, using the sustainable product innovation ideas and techniques to make sure that that gets institutionalized, embedded, and everybody's working towards that. This is a sample of a tool we've developed for sustainable product innovation that goes into new product development processes. This is a checklist and guidelines sample, and you can see here we have it right on the checklist and guidelines. Evaluate sustainability of the supply chain. Evaluate raw material suppliers, understand the source location of the company, consider transportation distances, select suppliers that have a sustainability program or policy. A lot of different things we would consider here as we're going through this, and this checklist and guidelines helps the new product development teams make sure they're considering all these different things as they're going through the process and helping to drive supply chain sustainability right in the beginning of the product development process. So we've talked about a lot of things. One thing that I really think is critical is definitely training. And the more training you can do for your suppliers and their suppliers, the better. Getting them educated. You do have the challenges often of dealing with maybe suppliers that are in different parts of the world that don't speak our language, and that's where it's going to be really important to have your trainings well translated or delivered by people who can speak the language and clearly communicate those efforts. But getting those trainings done is going to be very important. It could be live trainings at your annual supplier meetings, or it could be a webinar that you develop, or if you do have specific requirements for your suppliers, creating a series of maybe trainings for them to help them implement the things you want them to do. Some of them may not totally understand when you send them a questionnaire about chemicals in their products, or about material content, or about what they're doing to measure carbon footprint. They might not understand that or get it at all. So having some way to educate them on that is really important. And the more you do of that, it's not only going to be good for the people that are within your company that are assessing these suppliers, but it's going to be good to get your suppliers on the same page as you. And it's really a small investment for a big return to do effective training. So again, very important here. So next steps that I would definitely be recommending is, definitely understand your supply chain using the tools we talked about earlier to evaluate suppliers and understand their operations and materials, being very clear on who they are, what are their activities, do you have any risks with them. And by doing this, you're going to definitely reduce cost and risk. You're going to definitely have the ability to improve competitive advantage, because I can tell you maybe it's a small group of companies or organizations that are asking for this information, but it's only going to grow. As more and more sustainable supply chain and sustainable purchasing requirements are developed, as more and more government regulations come out, as more green building standards are developed, this is just going to get bigger and bigger, and we're starting to see voluntary standards like LEED be evolved into green building codes. So eventually these requirements that you see in LEED will probably filter into a code eventually. I've even heard where the city of Portland, Oregon is so interested in what's going on with the LEED version 4 requirements around material disclosure, they're starting to institute some activities and maybe even some regulations within purchasing activities by the Portland city government around material disclosure. So it's going to grow, it's going to get bigger, and if you want to definitely be competitive, you're going to need to do this. And you can definitely use this to increase sales, to improve your performance, because I guarantee when you do these assessments and audits of your suppliers and their supply chain, you're going to learn a lot of things that are going to make your operations more efficient. And I do think that companies that are working towards this, that are collecting this information, number one, they're trying to stay ahead of the curve to meet their existing requirements. But I have seen some situations where companies that have done a great job of this have maybe become preferred or sole vendors, or other business customers, maybe for retailers, maybe getting selected as a sustainable leader for Walmart, or getting specified in building projects. Any of these will definitely help increase sales, and your competitors that aren't doing this work, aren't staying innovative, are definitely going to be losing sales, and you're going to be ahead of the curve here. I know it's a kind of a big investment of time and whatnot, but it does require you to really evaluate where you're going here. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. I do think we've definitely met our learning objectives here with the items I covered. I do have several questions that I see on my screen right now, and what I would like to do now is address some of these questions. If any of you have additional questions, please type them into the question or chat box, and I can definitely answer those. And I do look forward to, the more questions I get, the more interesting this is. So let me move forward now and start to address some of these questions. First question I have is, how do I know how to develop a supplier questionnaire? What questions do I ask them? Oh, well, first thing you're going to want to really do is get an understanding of what your suppliers are supplying to you, what regulations are relevant for you, what material disclosure aspects are you thinking about, and then developing that questionnaire around that. We found it very important that when you develop questionnaires, you got to make sure that people are clearly answering them. You want to set them up in a manner that you know for sure that people looked at them, setting it up that they have to check either a yes or a no, or they have to, supply additional information is going to be really important. And then around that, you'll start to ask questions. I mean, some folks may be concerned about conflict minerals. So maybe your questionnaire just needs to be around conflict minerals, especially things that are supplied from the Republic of Congo and certain metals and things like that. Or maybe you have to comply with ROS and REACH. And then if you are into that situation where you're selling products in Europe and you got to comply with those standards, your questionnaires are probably going to be a lot more complex and a lot bigger, and definitely will require some information to educate your folks that are going to be you're going to be working with within the supply chain. Next question I have here is, just give me one second. What is the first step that my company should take to achieve supply chain sustainability? Well, the first step is to really understand your supply chain. Know who your suppliers are, know the diversity of them, know where they're located, know what products and materials they are supplying to you, get a good handle on that. Then the next thing you're definitely going to want to do is create some type of questionnaire, create some way of communicating to them. It could be as simple as getting the questionnaire together, maybe as simple as meeting at a supplier annual meeting where you're going to ask different things. Getting that information out there is going to be really important. Next question here says, what does formaldehyde added refer to? Specifically, what does the added portion refer to? Well, when we look at various products, I think this question is referring back to my comments around the lumber liquidators, engineered wood products that were being manufactured in China. Typically, when you're making engineered wood products, you're going to be using glues and resins, and those chemicals, they're made with certain chemicals that make the glues and resins work, and oftentimes they are formulated with formaldehydes. And what I mean by added is there are actually some products in the world that we extract right out of the earth that have naturally occurring formaldehyde in them, and that's known for many different materials. That's known that the formaldehyde does exist, and therefore, based on the various LEED standards or green building standards, or even requirements around volatile organic compound emissions that are set up in some states and other areas, that naturally occurring formaldehyde is not the issue. It's when you're adding the formaldehyde, whether it's in a resin that was in insulation or resin that was in or glue that's in a flooring product, are really important to understand there. So again, keep those in mind as you're moving forward here. And I do have one other question here. The other question I got is, what is the best method of communicating with suppliers? Well, what we have found is it's very important to work with purchasers. So the purchasing group usually has a good relationship with the suppliers, and if you are going to develop a questionnaire, you are going to start to collect supply chain information. Working with the purchasers within your organization that have the direct relationships with those suppliers is really important. It's also important, if you are working in other countries, to make sure that your questionnaires are clearly translated into that particular language, and that you have the ability to, basically interpret that when it is sent back and utilize that, as part of your analysis and information that you're checking out, when you're working on integrating supply chain sustainability. All right, I got one last question here. It says, if we were to select a third-party company for doing our audits, is that something that requires them to travel to different parts of the world, or how do they typically do these audits? Well, usually the third parties are most likely going to travel to the countries and visit the facilities. That's really what you want to look for. You can never really trust just a paper exchange or an email exchange or even a phone conversation. Actually getting people on the ground in those different countries, getting into the plants and taking a hard look at what's going on is going to be the best way to have assurance, or at least reduce risk, that there is going to be an issue. So you definitely, if you are looking to go with a third-party certification or auditor, you're definitely going to want to have the folks that can definitely get out and hit the ground and work in the countries where the different activities are happening or where your supply chain is located. So I'm looking at it. I don't really have any additional questions. If anybody has any last-minute ones, please send them in to me now, because we still have a few minutes here. But if not, we'll just wrap up the webinar today. I want to thank everybody for joining. I hope you found this interesting and informative. This is recorded, and there will be a copy of the recording sent out to all of you, as well as the folks that weren't able to attend that sent recording requests. So I really appreciate your time today. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is right here. Our phone number is here. We're glad to provide information to you to help you drive sustainability into your supply chain. And I really am strongly going to encourage all of you to think about how you make sustainability part of your business strategy, not just some add-on program. So again, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate the great questions, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future. We will be publishing our list of upcoming webinars very shortly. As of right now, I don't have anything scheduled into the summer, but we will be picking it up in the late summer and early fall, where we'll start a whole new series of different webinars. So if you have any topics you're really interested in, feel free to email me or to email Caitlin, and we'll make sure we address those for you. So thank you. Have a great day, and again, appreciate your time.